Mafia boss makes obese girls his pet, not knowing he'd get addicted to her. The roar of motorcycles came from behind, distant at first but growing louder with alarming speed. Lena's heart jumped as she checked her rearview mirror. A cluster of headlights approached, weaving between lanes like angry hornets. No, no, no. She pressed harder on the accelerator, but her modest sedan was no match for the powerful bikes now flanking her. Two bikes cut in front, forcing her to slam on the brakes. Another appeared on her left, so close she could see the rider's masked face. With nowhere else to go, she yanked the wheel right. The world spun. Metal screamed against metal. Her car slammed through the guardrail and plunged down the embankment. The airbag exploded in her face as the Honda rolled, finally resting on its side against a tree. Lena hung suspended by her seatbelt, ears ringing, taste of blood in her mouth. Through the shattered window, she saw boots crunching on broken glass. Rough hands reached in, cutting her free. "Please," she gasped as they dragged her out. "I don't have anything worth stealing." The bikers said nothing, holding her arms behind her back as the purr of a luxury engine approached. A black SUV rolled to a stop on the road above. A tall figure emerged, his silhouette backlit by the headlights. As he descended the embankment, the air around Lena grew thick with tension. The bikers straightened, their grips tightening on her arms. He moved like a predator. When he reached her, dark eyes studied her from a face carved from stone, beautiful but cruel. "So this is the one?" His voice was deep, touched with an accent. He gripped her chin, turning her face side to side like examining merchandise. "The bookkeeper." Lena jerked away from his touch. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just an accountant." The slap was so fast she didn't see it coming. Her head snapped to the side, cheek stinging. "Don't lie to me." He leaned close, his cologne mixing with the metallic scent of her blood. "You work for the Constantinos, and now you work for me. Put her in the car," he ordered, already turning away. "And make sure she can't see where we're going." Rough hands shoved a hood over her head. She struggled as they dragged her up the embankment. The last thing she saw was her crumpled car, steam rising from its ruined engine. Doors slammed, engines roared to life. Curled into herself, trembling with shock and fear in the back of the SUV, Lena realized her whole life had just been violently rewritten. The door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the vast room. Lena stumbled forward, her legs weak from the terrifying ride. The hood had been yanked off moments before they'd shoved her inside, leaving her blinking in the harsh light. This wasn't a prison cell. Far from it. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, casting rainbow reflections across marble floors. Plush furniture in deep burgundy filled the space, arranged around an ornate fireplace that dominated one wall. But despite its luxury, the room felt cold, lifeless, like a museum after hours. Her hands shook as she hugged herself, the thin fabric of her work blouse offering little comfort. The events of the past hour played on repeat in her mind. The crash, those motorcycles, that man's cruel eyes as he'd examined her like property. Rocco Moretti, everyone knew that name, whispered it in fear. He was the boogeyman of the city's underworld, the shadow that made even hardened criminals check their locks at night. And now she was trapped in his compound. Lena paced, her practical flats clicking against the marble. There had to be a way out. The windows stretched floor to ceiling, offering a view of manicured gardens below, but when she rushed to them, her heart sank. Bulletproof glass, thick enough to stop a truck. The door was solid wood, probably reinforced with steel. She was on what looked like the second floor, too, high to jump even if she could break the glass. The click of the door handle made her spin around. Her breath caught in her throat as Rocco stepped inside, filling the doorframe with his massive presence. He'd removed his suit jacket, his white shirt stretched across broad shoulders, sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled forearms marked with dark tattoos. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "Sit." One word, spoken quietly, but it might as well have been a physical force pushing her down onto the nearest chair. He moved to stand before her, hands in his pockets, studying her with those cold eyes. Up close, she could see the details of his face, the slight crook in his nose from an old break, the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the dark stubble along his jaw. He was handsome in a dangerous way, like admiring the beauty of a cobra before it strikes. "You've been feeding information to my enemies." Not a question, an accusation. "What? No!" Lena gripped the arms of the chair. "I'm just an accountant." I process payroll and expenses, that's all. For the Constantinos. His voice hardened. They've been moving against me, armed with detailed knowledge of my operations, financial records that only someone with your access could provide. I don't know anything about that, she insisted, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. I do basic bookkeeping, legitimate business accounts only. Please, you have to believe me. Rocco's hand shot out, gripping her chin just as he had at the crash site. But this time he held tighter, forcing her to meet his gaze. I don't have to believe anything. You'll stay here until I determine exactly what you know and who you've been talking to. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, a gesture both intimate and threatening. And if I find out you're lying to me. He let the threat hang unfinished in the air between them. Lena tried to turn away, but his grip was unbreakable. Tears of frustration and fear burned in her eyes. I'm telling the truth, she whispered. He released her suddenly, stepping back. Without his touch, she felt cold again, but also relieved. He moved toward the door, his back straight, shoulders set with tension. You'll stay here for now, he said, without turning around. I'll deal with you later. The door closed behind him with a final sounding click. Lena heard the lock engage, trapping her in this beautiful cage. She curled into herself on the chair, wrapping her arms around her knees, and finally let the tears fall. There would be no easy escape from this nightmare. She was completely at the mercy of a man who had none. The ceramic plate clinked against the mahogany table as one of Rocco's men set it down. Steam rose from what looked like an expensive cut of steak, accompanied by roasted vegetables that would have made her mouth water any other day. But Lena kept her arms crossed, staring at the wall instead. Boss says you need to eat. The guard grunted, his thick accent making the words sound more threatening than perhaps intended. Lena's stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the stress of being kidnapped had only intensified her hunger. Still, she lifted her chin. I'm not hungry. The guard shrugged and moved to stand by the door, his presence a constant reminder of her captivity. The room, despite its luxury, felt like a cage. Rich wallpaper, antique furniture, and crystal light fixtures couldn't mask the fact that she was a prisoner. Minutes ticked by. The food's aroma tormented her, and her resolve began to crack. Finally, Lena grabbed the fork. Each bite was a small surrender, but her body's needs won over her pride. The door opened just as she finished the last bite. Rocco Moretti filled the doorframe, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the hallway. He moved with predatory grace, settling into the chair across from her. Good, you ate. His dark eyes fixed on her empty plate. We need to talk about your situation, Lena. She flinched at hearing her name on his lips. There's nothing to talk about. I haven't done anything wrong. That's not what my sources tell me. He leaned forward, his presence overwhelming the space between them. The Gambino family's books are a mess. Money's missing, and you're their accountant. I just do their legitimate business accounting. Lena protested, her hands shaking under the table. I don't know anything about. Don't lie to me. His voice dropped dangerously low. You're smart enough to know what you were looking at. Smart enough to piece things together. And now you're going to help me fix this mess. Lena's throat went dry. Or what? A cruel smile curved his lips. I don't think you want to know the tram or what, Bella. But I'll give you a choice because I'm feeling generous. He stood up, circling the table until he was behind her chair. His hands came down on her shoulders, heavy and threatening. You can. Cooperate. Use that clever mind of yours to help me straighten out this situation. And maybe earn yourself some freedom down the line. His fingers dug into her flesh. Or you can refuse, and I'll make sure you never see the outside of these walls again. Your family, your friends, they'll never know what happened to you. You'll disappear, just like that. Tears burned behind Lena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You're a monster. No, I'm a businessman, and right now, you're my most valuable asset. He released her shoulders and moved back into her line of sight. So, what's it going to be, Lena? The easy way or the hard way? She looked around the opulent room, at the guard by the door, at the man who held her fate in his hands. There was no way out, no rescue coming. She was trapped in Rocco Moretti's world, and her only choice was how much she would suffer within it. Fine, she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. I'll help you. Smart. Girl. Rocco nodded to the guard. Get her the files. She starts tonight. As he turned to leave, Lena's hand clenched into fists under the table. She might be agreeing to his demands now, but she wouldn't be his prisoner forever. Somehow, someway, she would find an escape. She just had to be patient, play along, and wait for her chance. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Lena stepped into Rocco's private dining room. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she took in the opulent space. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across dark wooden panels and blood-red wallpaper. A long table dominated the room, set for two with fine china and gleaming silverware. Rocco stood at the head of the table, his massive frame highlighted by the flickering candlelight. His dark eyes followed her every movement, and the slight curl of his lips suggested he found her discomfort entertaining. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to the chair beside him. Not across the table, beside him. Close enough to touch. Lena's hands trembled as she pulled out the heavy chair. She smoothed her wrinkled clothes, painfully aware of how out of place she looked in this elegant setting. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Wine? He didn't wait for her answer, filling her glass with deep red liquid that looked almost black in the dim light. A server appeared silently, placing bowls of soup before them. The rich aroma of mushroom and truffle filled the air, making Lena's stomach growl despite her anxiety. She hadn't eaten properly since her capture. Eat, Rocco said, his voice softer but no less commanding. You'll need your strength. Lena picked up her spoon, trying to keep her hand steady. Why am I here? To dine with me. His answer was simple, matter of fact, as if kidnapping women for dinner was perfectly normal. Tell me about yourself, Lena. She stirred her soup, buying time. There's nothing to tell. I disagree. Rocco leaned back, studying her with those penetrating eyes. You're educated, skilled with numbers. You work for the Castellanos, yet you're not afraid of me. That's interesting. I'm terrified of you, Lena admitted, her voice barely a whisper. His laugh was deep and genuine, surprising her. No, you're not. Not really. You're nervous, yes. But true fear? He shook his head. I've seen true fear. It's not what I see in your eyes. The main course arrived, perfectly cooked steak with roasted vegetables. Lena cut into the meat, using the action to avoid his gaze. What do you see in my eyes, then? Defiance, intelligence, and something else. He took a sip of wine, never looking away from her. Something that makes me want to break you just to see if I can. A shiver ran down her spine, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. I'm not a toy for you to break. Everything in this city is mine to break if I choose. His voice remained casual, but there was steel beneath the words. Including you. They ate in tense silence for several minutes. Lena could feel his eyes on her, assessing, calculating. She tried to focus on her food, but every bite felt like ash in her mouth. Tell me about your family, he demanded suddenly. No. The word slipped out before she could stop it. His eyebrows rose slightly. No? My family has nothing to do with this. They're innocent. Innocent? He laughed again, but this time there was no warmth in it. Nobody is innocent in my world, Lena. The sooner you understand that, the better. The meal continued, each moment more suffocating than the last. Rocco asked questions about her work, her education, her life. Some she answered, others she refused. Each refusal seemed to amuse him more. Like a cat playing with a mouse, Lena sat rigid in her chair, hyper-aware of his proximity. The fine food turned to lead in her stomach as she realized just how deeply she was entangled in his web. This wasn't just about business anymore. She could feel it in the weight of his gaze, in the deliberate way he invaded her space. This man, this monster in an expensive suit, was playing with her. And she had no idea what game he was playing or what the rules were. The morning light filtered through the high windows of Rocco's office, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where Lena sat. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard of the laptop he'd provided, her stomach churning as she felt his presence behind her. He'd given her what seemed like a simple task reorganizing his accounts, but she knew better. This was another way to establish his control. These spreadsheets are a mess, she muttered, more to herself than to him. The numbers were scattered across multiple files, with no clear system. It was the kind of disorganization that made her accountant's brain itch. Then fix them. Rocco's voice carried that perpetual note of command. He leaned against his desk, too close for comfort, his expensive suit brushing against her arm. That's what you're here for, isn't it? Lena straightened her spine, trying to ignore how his proximity made her pulse quicken. I'll need to create a new system. The current one is inefficient. She began typing, setting up a template the way she would have done at her old job. At least this was familiar territory, something she could control. No. His hand clamped down on her shoulder. You'll do it my way. Your way makes no sense, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. The current system is prone to errors. Rocco's grip tightened. Did I ask for your opinion? Heat rushed to her face, anger, fear, and something else she didn't want to name. You wanted me to help with the accounts. I'm telling you how to make them better. In one fluid motion, he spun her chair around. His hands gripped the armrests, caging her in. Let me make something very clear, Lena. You're not here to make improvements. You're here to do exactly what I tell you, exactly how I tell you to do it. She met his gaze, despite every instinct screaming at her to look away. Then why have me do it at all? If you don't want it done properly? His laugh was cold. You think you know better than me how to run my business? I know better than you how to organize financial records. She shot back, her heart hammering against her ribs. That's my job. That's what I'm good at. For a moment something flickered in his dark eyes, surprise, maybe even respect, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Your job is to follow orders, nothing more. The tension between them crackled like electricity. Lena was acutely aware of how close he was, how his cologne filled her senses, how easy it would be for him to hurt her. And yet, she couldn't back down. Not about this. Fine, she said, her voice tight. Show me exactly how you want it done. Rocco studied her face, his expression unreadable. Then he reached past her, his chest brushing against her shoulder as he pulled up a file on the laptop. Like this. Every transaction, every account, formatted exactly this way. Lena looked at the screen, biting back another protest. The system was clumsy, redundant, and would take twice as long as her method. But as she felt the heat of his body next to hers, saw the warning in his eyes, she understood. This wasn't about efficiency. It was about obedience. Well? He prompted, his voice dangerously soft. She swallowed her pride and began copying his format. Yes, sir. His lips curved into a satisfied smirk. He straightened up but didn't move away, maintaining his intimidating presence behind her chair. Good girl. The praise, though condescending, sent an unwanted shiver down her spine. As she worked, following his inefficient system to the letter, she could feel his eyes on her. Every keystroke, every mouse click, felt like another small surrender. She might be good at her job, might know better ways to do this, but none of that mattered. Here, in his world, everything would be done his way. The heavy oak door creaked as Lena pushed it open, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd spent 3 days memorizing the guards' rotations, noting the brief window when they changed shifts. Now, with trembling hands and unsteady breaths, she seized her chance. The side entrance to the compound beckoned like a beacon of hope. Cool night air kissed her face as she slipped through the gap, her shoes silent against the polished marble floor. Freedom waited just beyond the manicured gardens, past the iron gates that kept her prisoner in this gilded cage. Lena moved quickly but carefully, pressing herself against the shadows of the building. Every rustle of leaves made her jump. Every distant voice sent ice through her veins. But she couldn't stop now. This might be her only chance. The gravel crunched beneath her feet as she darted between perfectly trimmed hedges. 20 more yards to the gate. 15. 10. A. Hand shot out from the darkness, fingers digging into her arm with bruising force. Lena's scream died in her throat as she was yanked backward, her body colliding with a wall of solid muscle. Going somewhere, Dolcezza? Rocco's voice dripped with quiet fury. His grip tightened as she struggled, twisting her around to face him. In the dim light, his features were carved from shadow, but his eyes burned with rage. Let me go, Lena thrashed against his hold, panic rising in her chest. I'm not your prisoner. His laugh was cold, devoid of humor. That's exactly what you are. Without warning, he dragged her back toward the house, his pace brutal and unforgiving. Lena stumbled, but he didn't slow down, forcing her to keep up or be dragged. They entered through a different door, one that led to a wing of the house she hadn't seen before. The corridors were darker here, the luxury more subdued. Rocco's fingers dug into her flesh as he shoved her into a room, following close behind. "You think you can run from me?" He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You think I wouldn't catch you?" Lena backed away until she hit a wall, her breath coming in short gasps. The room was smaller than her usual quarters, sparsely furnished with just a bed and a chair. No windows, no escape. Rocco stalked toward her, every step measured and threatening. He planted his hands on either side of her head, caging her in. "I warned you what would happen if you tried to leave." "I'm not your property," Lena spat, though her voice shook. "You can't keep me here forever." His hand shot to her throat, not squeezing but holding firm enough to make his point. "I can do whatever I want with you. The sooner you understand that, the easier this will be." Tears burned behind Lena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. But as his grip loosened and his hand moved to cup her face in an almost gentle gesture, something inside her cracked. "This is your home now," he said, his thumb brushing her cheek in a mockery of tenderness. "Try to run again, and I'll make sure you never see daylight without me by your side." He stepped back, leaving her cold and trembling against the wall. The lock clicked with devastating finality as he left, trapping her in this windowless prison. Only then did Lena slide to the floor, her legs no longer able to support her. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. There would be no escape, no rescue. The compound's walls might as well have been 100 feet high, the gates sealed with unbreakable chains. Rocco's power extended far beyond these walls. Where could she possibly run that he wouldn't find her? But as she sat there in the darkness, wrapped in the suffocating weight of her captivity, Lena straightened her spine. She might be trapped, might be at his mercy, but she wouldn't let him see her break. She wouldn't give him that victory, even as despair threatened to consume her. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across Lena's prison. She hadn't slept, her body still aching from yesterday's failed escape attempt. The bruises on her wrists were a stark reminder of Rocco's iron grip. She sat curled in the corner of the plush bed, refusing to find comfort in the luxurious surroundings. The lock clicked, and Lena's heart jumped into her throat. Rocco entered, his massive frame filling the doorway. But something was different about him this morning. His usual predatory stance was replaced with something almost hesitant. "Did you sleep?" His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it, though still gravelly from what she assumed was his own sleepless night. Lena didn't answer, keeping her eyes fixed on the window. She heard him sigh, followed by his footsteps approaching the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight as he sat on the edge, maintaining a careful distance. "Let me see your wrists." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't his usual command either. "Why? So you can admire your handiwork?" Lena spat the words, finally turning to face him. She expected to see anger flash in his dark eyes, but instead, she caught something else, something that made her pause. Rocco's jaw tightened. "Don't make this difficult, Piccola." The nickname slipped out, surprising them both. He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. His touch was unexpectedly gentle as he examined the purple marks circling her wrists. His thumbs traced the bruises with a tenderness that seemed completely at odds with the man who'd inflicted them. Lena watched his face, confused by the slight furrow in his brow, the way his lips pressed together in what almost looked like regret. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" he asked, still holding her wrist. "Would it matter if I was?" His eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment, Lena saw something crack in his usually impenetrable facade. "Yes," he said, simply, the word hanging heavy between them. Lena pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't understand you," she admitted, hating how vulnerable the words made her feel. "One minute you're throwing me around like a rag doll, the next you're playing concerned captor?" Rocco stood abruptly, running a hand through his dark hair. The gesture was so human, so unlike his usual controlled demeanor, that it threw Lena off balance. "You tried to escape," he said, but the words lacked their usual bite. "What did you expect me to do?" "Let me go?" Lena suggested, though they both knew it was impossible. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. You know I can't do that. He moved to the window, his broad shoulders blocking out the morning light. But I don't. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I don't want to hurt you. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to examine. Lena found herself studying his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the windowsill. For the first time, she saw beyond the monster, catching a glimpse of the man beneath. I'll have someone bring you breakfast, he said finally, turning back to her. And ice for those bruises. Their eyes met, and Lena felt something shift in the air between them. The hardness was still there in his gaze, but now it seemed to mask something deeper, something that made her heart beat a little faster. Rocco moved to the door, his usual grace returning with each step. But before he left, he paused, his hand on the doorframe. Don't try to run again, Lena. His voice was quiet but firm. Next time, I might not be able to control myself so well. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Lena alone with her thoughts and the lingering warmth where his fingers had traced her skin. She stared at her wrists, replaying the gentleness of his touch, the crack in his armor she'd witnessed. It terrified her how much that small show of tenderness affected her, how it made her question everything she thought she knew about her captor. Lena's fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting numbers that represented more money than she'd ever seen in her life. Blood money, she reminded herself. Still, she couldn't help but be impressed by the intricate web of finances Rocco had built. You missed a decimal point. His voice came from behind her, making her jump. She hadn't heard him enter the study. I did not, she muttered, double-checking the screen. But there it was, the mistake glaring back at her. Her cheeks burned as she corrected it. Rocco leaned over her shoulder, his cologne wrapping around her like an expensive trap. Careful with those numbers, Piccola. One mistake could cost millions. Days passed like this, Rocco hovering, teaching, demanding perfection. He was everywhere. When she ate breakfast, he was there reading reports. When she worked in the study, he appeared with coffee and critical comments. Even in her dreams, she couldn't escape him. The compound became familiar, though no less oppressive. She learned its rhythms. When Rocco held meetings, which guards changed shifts, how many steps it took to walk from her room to the kitchen. She learned that Rocco took his coffee black in the morning but with a splash of whiskey after sunset, that he wore reading glasses when he thought no one was looking. You're getting better at this, he said one afternoon, reviewing her work. His praise, rare as diamonds, shouldn't have made her stomach flutter. I was already good at this, she snapped, hating how his approval affected her. You just never noticed. His hand landed on the back of her chair, fingers brushing her shoulder. I notice everything about you, Lena. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning she refused to analyze. She focused on the spreadsheet instead, but the numbers blurred together. Your hands are shaking, he observed, because you're standing too close. She meant it to sound angry, but her voice came out breathless. Am I? He didn't move away. If anything, he leaned closer. Does my presence make you nervous, Piccola? Lena spun her chair around, ready to tell him exactly what she thought of his games. But he was right there, too close, his dark eyes intense. Stop calling me that. What should I call you then? His voice dropped lower, sending shivers down her spine. What would you prefer? How about my actual name? Or better yet, don't talk to me at all. She stood up, needing to put space between them. But he blocked her path, one hand braced against the desk. You don't mean that, he said, studying her face. You respond to my voice. I see how you watch me when you think I'm not looking. I watch you because you're my captor, she hissed. Because I need to know what mood you're in so I can avoid your anger. He caught her chin between his thumb and forefinger. Is that really why? Yes, she lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. Liar. His thumb traced her bottom lip, and she couldn't stop the small gasp that escaped. You're drawn to me just as I'm drawn to you. It infuriates you, doesn't it? I hate you, she whispered, but even she didn't believe it anymore. No, he said, his face inches from hers. You hate that you don't hate me. The truth of his words stung. She shoved against his chest, needing to escape the magnetic pull between them. You're delusional. You kept me prisoner, forced me to work for you, and now you think what? That Stockholm Syndrome means I actually want you? Something dark flashed in his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, or kill her. Instead, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. Confusion replaced the usual confidence on his face, as if he'd surprised himself with his actions. Lena stood frozen, her body still humming from his proximity, watching as Rocco struggled with whatever was happening between them. Thunder rolled outside the compound as Lena stared at the financial documents spread across the mahogany desk. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed numbers into the spreadsheet, hyper-aware of Rocco's presence behind her. He'd been watching her work for the past hour, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to engulf her completely. "You're making mistakes," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Start over." Lena's jaw clenched. "I'm not making mistakes. These numbers are correct." In an instant, Rocco's hand slammed down beside her keyboard, making her jump. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm calling you wrong," Lena shot back, immediately regretting her words, as his other hand gripped her shoulder. With frightening speed, Rocco spun her chair around to face him. His dark eyes blazed with fury as he trapped her between his arms, gripping the chair's armrests. "You seem to have forgotten something very important. Bella, you're not here by choice." Lena's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to look away. "How could I forget? You remind me every day that I'm your prisoner." His fingers caught her chin, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "Not just my prisoner, my property." She tried to jerk away, but his grip tightened. The pressure wasn't enough to hurt, but it was impossible to ignore. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, the gesture surprisingly gentle despite his harsh words. "Stop fighting me," he growled. "You're only making this harder on yourself." Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading through her body like wildfire. She hated how her breath caught when he touched her, how her skin tingled where his fingers made contact. This was wrong. He was her captor, a monster who'd torn her life apart. But when he pulled her to her feet, pressing her against the desk, her body betrayed her. His broad chest against hers, his thigh wedged in between her legs. It was overwhelming. She could smell his expensive cologne, feel the raw power in his muscles as he held her there. "I can feel you trembling," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "Is it fear, Lena? Or something else?" She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sensations. "I hate you. Lie to yourself all you want." His hand slid down her side, gripping her hip. "Your body knows the truth." When his mouth crashed against hers, it was like being struck by lightning. The kiss was brutal, demanding, full of pent-up frustration and dark desire. Lena's hands came up to push him away, but somehow ended up fisting in his shirt instead, pulling him closer. Rocco growled his approval, deepening the kiss until she was dizzy with need. His teeth caught her lower lip, the sharp sting making her gasp. He took advantage, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her completely. Just as suddenly as it began, he pulled away. Lena sagged against the desk, her legs weak, her lips burning from his kiss. Rocco stared down at her, his chest heaving, something wild in his eyes. "Remember this moment," he said roughly. "Remember how easily I can make you forget your hatred." He turned and stalked from the room, leaving Lena alone with her chaotic thoughts. She touched her swollen lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss, the heat of his body against hers. Later that night, she lay in her bed, unable to sleep. The memory of their encounter played on repeat in her mind. How could she have responded like that to a man who'd kidnapped her, who treated her like property? But there was no denying the way her body had come alive under his touch, the electric current that had sparked between them. Confusion and desire warred in her chest as she stared at the ceiling. She'd never felt anything like this before, this mix of fear and attraction, hatred and want. It terrified her, not just because of who Rocco was, but because deep down, she knew he was right. Her body had betrayed her completely, and there was no taking that back. The heavy oak door slammed open, making Lena jump. Two of Rocco's men dragged him in, his white shirt stained crimson. Her heart lurched at the sight of blood dripping onto the marble floor. "Fix him up," one of the men ordered, shoving a first aid kit into her hands. "Boss doesn't want a doctor involved." Lena's fingers trembled as she opened the kit. Rocco sat heavily in a leather armchair, his breath coming in sharp pants. A deep gash ran across his shoulder, and bruises were already forming on his jaw. "What happened?" she asked, despite herself. "None of your concern." His voice was gruff, but lacking its usual edge. He winced as she helped him remove his shirt. The silence stretched between them as she cleaned the wound. This close, she could smell his cologne mixed with sweat and blood. His muscles tensed under her touch, and she tried to ignore how solid and warm he felt. "You've done this before," he observed, watching her methodically work. "My father was a construction worker. Accidents happened." She pressed an alcohol-soaked cloth to the cut, and he hissed, "Sorry. Don't apologize. Weakness has no place in this world." But there was something in his voice, a crack in the armor. Maybe it was the blood loss, or maybe it was the late hour, but his usual walls seemed lower. "Is that what happened to you?" Lena asked softly, starting to stitch the wound. "Someone made you apologize once too often?" His laugh was bitter. "Maria." The name fell from his lips like a curse. "She taught me about weakness, about trust." His jaw clenched. "She was my first everything. Love, betrayal, lesson in this life." Lena's hands stilled for a moment. She'd never heard him speak so openly. "What did she do?" "Sold information to my enemies. Nearly got me killed." His eyes grew distant. "I loved her. Would have given her the world. Instead, she tried to destroy mine." The raw pain in his voice made something twist in Lena's chest. She finished the stitches in silence, trying to process this new side of him. The monster who'd kidnapped her, who'd threatened and controlled her, suddenly seemed more human. "There," she said, taping a bandage over the wound. "It should heal." His hand caught her wrist as she pulled away. His grip wasn't painful, but it held her in place. Their eyes met, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Why aren't you afraid of me anymore?" he asked, his thumb brushing over her pulse point. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Just not in the same way." Something dark and hungry flashed in his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might pull her closer, might act on the tension crackling between them. Instead, he released her wrist and leaned back, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Get some rest," he muttered, eyes already closing. Lena stepped back, gathering the bloody gauze and empty antiseptic bottles. She should leave, should retreat to her room, and try to forget this moment of vulnerability. Instead, she found herself sinking into the chair across from him. In sleep, the hardness left his face. The furrow between his brows smoothed out, making him look younger, more like the man he might have been before Maria's betrayal turned him cruel. Her chest ached with emotions she didn't want to name. Watching him now, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, this dangerous, wounded man who'd trapped her in his world. The realization terrified her more than any of his threats ever had, because fear she could fight, hate she could hold on to. But this feeling blooming in her chest despite everything he'd done, this could destroy her. The autumn wind whipped through Lena's hair as she stepped out of the black SUV, her arms laden with bags from her supervised shopping trip. One of Rocco's men, Marco, had accompanied her like a silent shadow, a constant reminder that she wasn't truly free. But something felt different today. The usual guards weren't at their posts, and an eerie silence hung over the compound. Her heart skipped when she heard shouting from inside the main house. Marco immediately tensed, his hand moving to his weapon. "Stay behind me," he ordered. All pretense of being just a chauffeur dropped. They entered through the side door, and the metallic scent of blood hit Lena's nostrils. The shopping bag slipped from her grasp, forgotten on the marble floor. Down the hallway, she could hear Rocco's voice, a tone she'd never heard before, dark and deadly. "You thought you could betray me?" His words echoed off the walls. "After everything I gave you?" Marco pushed Lena into an alcove, but she could still see into the main room. The sight made her blood run cold. One of Rocco's most trusted men, Antonio, was on his knees, face bloody and swollen. Two other men held him down while Rocco towered over him, his usual controlled demeanor replaced by pure rage. "Boss, please," Antonio begged, blood dripping from his split lip. "They threatened my family. I was your family." Rocco's roar made everyone flinch. He grabbed Antonio by the throat, forcing him to look up. 3 months you've been feeding information to the Calabrese family. 3 months of betrayal." Lena pressed herself against the wall, unable to look away. This was the side of Rocco she'd only heard whispers about: Refik, the brutal mafia boss who'd carved his empire through violence and fear. His expensive suit was splattered with blood, his knuckles raw from the beating he'd already delivered. "You know what happens to rats," Rocco said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He pulled out his gun, the metal gleaming under the chandelier lights. Lena wanted to run, to cover her ears, to pretend this wasn't happening. But her feet wouldn't move. She watched as Rocco pressed the barrel against Antonio's forehead, watched as tears streamed down the traitor's face. "Please," Antonio whimpered. "My children. Your children will know their father died a traitor." Rocco's words were ice cold. "That's your legacy now." The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. Lena jumped, a small gasp escaping her lips. Antonio's body crumpled to the floor, and the pool of blood began spreading across the expensive Persian rug. Rocco turned, and his eyes locked with Lena's. There was no remorse there, no hint of the man who'd shown her moments of tenderness. This was the real him, dangerous, lethal, completely in control. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he approached, his shoes leaving bloody footprints on the floor. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell gunpowder and cologne. His hand, still warm from the gun, came up to cup her face. The gesture was almost gentle, but his eyes remained hard. "This is who I am, Bella," he said softly, his thumb brushing her cheek. "This is what happens to those who betray me." Lena couldn't stop trembling, caught between terror and a sick fascination. She should be horrified, should be trying to run. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, even as her mind screamed at the wrongness of it. "Clean this up," Rocco commanded his men, never taking his eyes off Lena, "and make sure his family understands the consequences of disloyalty." The violence of the moment hung between them, electric and dangerous. Lena could feel the killer's heat radiating off him, see the darkness swimming in his eyes. She should be afraid. She was afraid. But there was something else, too. Something that made her pulse race for entirely different reasons. Lena sat at the window of her luxurious prison, watching rain streak down the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman she barely recognized anymore. The marks on her neck from Rocco's rough handling had faded, but the memory of his touch lingered, setting her skin on fire. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to quiet her racing thoughts. Yesterday's moment of vulnerability when he'd shown her his scars, both physical and emotional, had cracked something inside her. The way his hands had trembled as he spoke about his past. The raw pain in his voice when he mentioned his first love's betrayal. It had made him human, too human. "I'm losing my mind," she whispered to herself, wrapping her arms around her body. The silk robe he'd given her felt too soft, too intimate against her skin. Everything in this gilded cage reminded her of him, his power, his control, his unexpected moments of gentleness. A door slammed somewhere in the compound, making her jump. Her heart raced, wondering if it was him. She hated how her body responded to even the possibility of his presence. Every time he entered a room, the air seemed to crackle with tension. She couldn't forget how he'd looked at her last night, his dark eyes burning with something more than just possession. Lena forced herself to move away from this window, pacing the room. She needed to stay focused, to remember who she was before all this. But that woman felt like a stranger now. The bookkeeper who'd lived a quiet, predictable life seemed to belong to another world entirely. Her fingers traced the expensive furniture, remembering how Rocco had slammed her against this very dresser yesterday, his body caging her in. She'd fought him. Of course she always did. But they both knew the truth. Her resistance was becoming more about the game than actual defiance. "Get it together," she muttered, running her hands through her hair in frustration. She tried to summon hatred for him for the way he'd kidnapped her, threatened her, controlled her, but all she could think about was how he'd looked when tending to her twisted ankle last week, his touch surprisingly gentle as he wrapped the bandage. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. Her breath caught as they passed her door without stopping. Relief and disappointment warred in her chest, and she hated herself for feeling both. Lena collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. The sheets still held his scent from when he'd pinned her here this morning, his lips harsh against her throat as he'd reminded her who she belonged to. She should have felt violated, terrified. Instead, she'd arched into his touch, craving more. "This isn't me," she whispered, But even that felt like a lie now. Who was she, really? The defiant prisoner, or the woman who melted under his dark gaze? The survivor looking for escape, or the willing captive who'd started to crave her cage? Her body hummed with remembered pleasure, every rough kiss, every demanding touch, every moment he'd made her forget everything except the feel of him. But her mind screamed warnings, reminding her of his cruelty, of the blood on his hands, of the monster beneath the man. Lena stood abruptly, needing to move, to think. But everywhere she turned in this room held memories of their encounters, violent, passionate, tender, brutal. Each corner told a story of power and submission, of resistance and surrender. She couldn't escape him, not even in her own thoughts. The war inside her raged stronger than ever. She wanted to hate him. She should hate him. But hate didn't explain why her heart raced when he was near, why she ached when he was gone, why she craved his approval even as she fought against his control. Lena sat in Rocco's study, her fingers nervously tapping against the leather armrest of the chair. The evening light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room. Rocco stood by his desk, his presence filling the space with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Let's play a game," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "You've been here for weeks now, trying to outsmart me at every turn. Tell me, Kara, how's that working out for you?" Lena's throat tightened. She forced herself to meet his gaze, fighting the urge to look away. "I'm not playing any games." "No?" He moved closer, each step deliberate. "Then what do you call this dance we've been doing? The way you pretend to submit while plotting your next move?" His words hit too close to home. Lena's heart raced as she realized he'd seen through her act, her careful balance of compliance and resistance, the way she'd tried to maintain some semblance of control while appearing to yield to his demands. "I call it survival," she replied, her voice shakier than she intended. Rocco laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Survival? Is that what you tell yourself when you lean into my touch before pulling away? When you challenge me with those sharp words of yours, knowing exactly what it does to me?" He was right in front of her now, his hands gripping the arms of her chair, caging her in. Lena could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. Her breath caught in her throat. "You're not as clever as you think you are, Piccola. I see right through you." The truth of his words stung. She had been playing a game trying to find weaknesses, looking for opportunities, all while fighting the growing attraction between them. But Rocco had known all along. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, hating how vulnerable she sounded. "Honesty." His hand moved to her chin, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "Stop pretending you don't feel this. Stop acting like you're just my prisoner." "That's exactly what I am," Lena shot back, but her voice lacked conviction. "Are you?" His thumb traced her lower lip, and she couldn't suppress a shiver. "Then why haven't you tried to escape again? Why do you watch me when you think I'm not looking?" Each question was like a dagger, cutting through her carefully constructed defenses. Lena felt exposed, raw. The worst part was that she couldn't deny any of it. "I hate you," she said. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No, you don't." Rocco's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "You hate that you want me. You hate that I can see right through your little act. But you don't hate me." His words ignited something in her: anger, desire, fear, all mixed together in a volatile cocktail. Lena surged forward, nearly closing the distance between them. For a moment, she could feel his breath on her lips, see the triumph in his eyes. But at the last second, she pulled back, gripping the arms of the chair until her knuckles turned white. No, she wouldn't give him this victory, wouldn't let him strip away the last of her defenses. "You're wrong," she said, even as her body betrayed her with its trembling. "You might control my body, might keep me locked up here, but you don't control my heart. You never will." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she clung to it like a lifeline. It was all she had left. Rocco's eyes darkened, and for a moment, something dangerous flashed across his face. Then his expression smoothed into that familiar mask of control, but Lena could see the cracks in his composure. "We'll see about that, Kara," he murmured, straightening up. "We'll see." Lena stood at the window of Rocco's study, watching rain streak down the glass. The compound's garden stretched out before her, a beautiful prison she'd grown too familiar with. Her fingers traced the cool surface, leaving ghostly prints behind. "You can't keep ignoring me," she said without turning around. sensing Rocco's presence behind her. The room felt charged with tension, like the air before a storm. "I own you," he replied, his voice deceptively soft. "I can do whatever I want." Something in Lena snapped. Weeks of captivity, of fighting her growing attraction, of trying to maintain some semblance of control, it all boiled over. She spun to face him, her chest heaving. "You don't own my thoughts, my feelings. Those are mine." Her voice shook but remained firm. "You can keep me here, force me to work for you, but you can't control what's in my head." Rocco crossed the room, in 3 long strides. His presence overwhelmed her, but she stood her ground. His dark eyes searched her face, looking for something she couldn't name. Then, something shifted. The mask he always wore, the cold, calculating Mafia boss, cracked. His shoulders slumped slightly, and for a moment, he looked almost human. "You think this is easy for me?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "Having you here, watching you fight me every step of the way?" Lena's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She'd prepared for his anger, his dominance, not this raw honesty. "I see the way you look at me," he continued, reaching out to touch her face. His fingers trembled slightly. "Like I'm a monster, and maybe I am. But you," he dropped his hand, turning away. "You make me want to be something else." The confession hung heavy in the air between them. Lena felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "My first love," he said, staring out. "At the rain. She betrayed me to a rival family. I found her body in the trunk of a car." His fists clenched at his sides. "That's what love gets you in this world. Death, pain, weakness." Lena moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "Is that why you keep everyone at arm's length? Why you try to control everything?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Control is all I have. Until you." He turned back to her, his eyes intense. "You challenge everything. You make me question myself. And I hate it. I hate that I can't stop thinking about you." The admission stunned them both into silence. Lena's heart hammered in her chest as she processed his words. This dangerous man, this killer, was laying himself bare before her. "I'm not her," Lena said softly. "I'm not your past." "No," he agreed, moving closer until she could feel his breath on her skin. "You're something far more dangerous." Her body betrayed her, leaning into his warmth despite her mind screaming to maintain distance. His presence was intoxicating, and she found herself drowning in the depth of emotions she saw in his eyes. "I should hate you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "After everything you've done." "But you don't," he finished for her, his words more statement than question. And he was right. That was the terrifying truth she'd been running from. Somewhere between the fear and the anger, between his cruelty and his rare moments of tenderness, she'd started to care for him. The realization scared her more than any threat he'd ever made. She stepped back, needing space to think, to breathe. But her heart had already betrayed her, and they both knew it. The wall she'd built around herself had crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. "No," she thought fiercely, refusing to acknowledge the ache in her chest. She wouldn't admit it, not to him, not to herself. She couldn't afford to care, not about a man who'd taken everything from her. But as she watched him watching at her, she knew it was already too late. The autumn breeze carried a hint of freedom as Rocco's black SUV wound through the countryside. Lena pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the city fade into rolling hills. Her heart raced not from fear this time, but from the strange anticipation building in her chest. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rocco's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You'll see." The car climbed higher into the hills until they reached a clearing overlooking the entire city. Rocco killed the engine and got out, coming around to open her door. The gesture felt oddly gentlemanly for a man who'd kept her prisoner for weeks. The view took Lena's breath away. The city sprawled below them like a glittering carpet, the afternoon sun catching on glass buildings and distant water. Up here, the air felt cleaner, lighter. She could almost pretend she was free. "This is where I come to think," Rocco said, his deep voice carrying on the wind. "When the weight of everything becomes too much." Lena wrapped her arms around herself, fighting a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "And what do you think about? Lately?" His dark eyes fixed on her. "You." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Lena's pulse quickened as Rocco stepped closer, his presence overwhelming even in the open space. "You're in my head," he continued, his voice rough. "Every fucking minute. I can't." He cut himself off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Before Lena could respond, his phone buzzed. The spell broke as Rocco answered, his expression darkening with each word from the caller. When he hung up, the tenderness was gone, replaced by the hard mask of the Mafia boss. "We need to go. Now." They barely made it back to the car when the first gunshots rang out. Rocco shoved her into the passenger seat, covering her body with his own, as bullets pinged off the reinforced metal. The engine roared to life, and they tore down the winding road. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs as Rocco swerved to avoid another spray of bullets. His arm shot out, keeping her from hitting the dashboard as he took a sharp turn. "Hold on," he growled, accelerating through a narrow gap between trees. They lost their pursuers in the dense forest, but the tension remained electric between them. When Rocco finally pulled into a hidden garage at his compound, they were both breathing hard. Before Lena could move, Rocco's hand shot out, gripping her thigh. The touch sent sparks through her body. "Are you hurt?" His voice was barely controlled, rage and something else simmering beneath the surface. "No, The words died in her throat as his other hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "They could have killed you." The words came out as a snarl. "Because of me. Because you're mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it ignited something deep inside her. When his lips crashed into hers, she didn't fight it. The kiss was brutal, desperate, full of the fear and adrenaline they'd just survived. Rocco pulled her across the console onto his lap, his hands everywhere at once. Lena melted into him, giving in to the storm of emotions she'd been fighting for weeks. His touch burned through her clothes, marking her as his. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Lena knew something fundamental had shifted. The line between captor and captive had blurred beyond recognition. She was no longer just his prisoner, she was something else entirely. Rocco's forehead pressed against hers, his breathing ragged. The vulnerability in his eyes scared her more than any show of violence ever had. Because in that moment, she realized she was just as trapped by him as he was by her. Lena knew something was wrong the moment Franco, Rocco's trusted lieutenant, suggested they take a different route back to the compound. Her stomach twisted as his silver BMW veered off the main road, taking a sharp turn down an unfamiliar street. "Where are we going?" Her voice wavered, but she fought to keep it steady. "The compound is the other way." Franco's usually friendly face hardened into something unrecognizable. Change of plans. He pressed a button, and the car doors locked with a decisive click. Fear crawled up her spine. Franco had been kind to her since day one, bringing her coffee in the mornings, telling jokes to make her smile. Now, his knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and his jaw was set in grim determination. "Franco, please." Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Whatever this is." "Shut up," he snapped, all pretense of friendliness gone. "You've caused enough trouble. Do you know what you've done to him? Rocco was untouchable before you. Now?" He laughed bitterly. "Now he's weak." The car accelerated through empty streets, each turn taking them further from safety. Lena's mind raced. She'd watched Rocco train his men enough times to know some basic self-defense, but Franco was twice her size and armed. They pulled into an abandoned warehouse district. The car stopped beside a decrepit building, its windows boarded up and walls covered in graffiti. Franco yanked her out of the car, his grip bruising her arm. "Inside. Now." The warehouse was dark and damp, smelling of rust and decay. Metal chains hung from exposed beams, and old machinery cast long shadows in the dim light filtering through broken windows. Franco shoved her into a metal chair, zip-tying her wrists to the arms. "Your boyfriend's going to pay for what he did to my family," Franco snarled, pacing before her. "He took everything from me, and now?" His smile was cruel. "Now I'm going to take everything from him." Hours passed like years. Lena's wrists were raw from struggling against the zip ties. Her phone lay shattered on the ground where Franco had thrown it. She thought of Rocco. His face when he'd realized she was gone, the rage that would consume him. The warehouse door burst open with a thunderous crash. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Lena screamed as bullets whizzed past, ducking as low as her restraints would allow. "Find her!" Rocco's voice echoed through the chaos, deadly and desperate. Franco grabbed her hair, yanking her head back as he pressed a gun to her temple. One more step, and I'll paint the walls with her blood. The gunfire stopped. Through tears of pain, Lena saw Rocco emerge from the shadows, his usually impeccable suit splattered with blood. His eyes, when they found her, burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. Let her go. Each word was a death sentence. Franco's laugh was hysterical. Or what? You'll kill me? You already did that when you murdered my brother, when you took everything I had. The gun pressed harder against Lena's temple. Now you get to watch while I take everything from you. It happened in a blur. Lena slammed her head back into Franco's face, feeling his nose crack. The gun went off, the bullet grazing her shoulder. Then Rocco was there, a force of nature, ripping Franco away from her. The fight was brutal and quick. Rocco's fists connected with devastating precision, each blow fueled by pure rage. Franco never stood a chance. When it was over, he lay motionless on the concrete floor, and Rocco was cutting through Lena's restraints with shaking hands. Are you hurt? His voice was rough, his fingers gentle as they explored the graze on her shoulder. I'll kill them all. Everyone who helped him. Everyone who knew. Lena's whole body trembled as the adrenaline crashed. Blood trickled down her arm, but all she could focus on was Rocco's face, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. I thought, his words caught in his throat, when I couldn't find you. She saw it then. The crack in his armor, the depth of his fear. This man, who ruled through violence and power, had been afraid. For her. The air was thick with gun smoke and the metallic scent of blood. Rocco moved through the dimly lit warehouse like a predator, each step deliberate and deadly. Bodies littered the floor behind him, a trail of destruction leading to his ultimate goal. Lena. Her wrists were raw from the rope binding her to a metal chair. The taste of copper lingered in her mouth from where they'd struck her. But what scared her most wasn't the physical pain. It was the way her heart leaped when she heard the first gunshots echo through the building. She knew it was him. Coming for her. The door burst open with explosive force. Rocco stood there, his expensive suit spattered with crimson, his eyes wild with a rage she'd never seen before. 2 more shots rang out, taking down the men who had been guarding her. They crumpled without a sound. Lena. His voice was rough, almost animal-like as he rushed to her side. She flinched when his bloody hands touched her face, checking for injuries. The gentleness of his touch contrasted sharply with the violence she'd just heard. Her body trembled, torn between wanting to pull away and lean into his warmth. Did they hurt you? He demanded, his fingers trailing over the bruise on her cheek. Lena shook her head, unable to find her voice. Rocco's jaw clenched as he cut through her restraints with a knife. The moment she was free, he pulled her against his chest, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed possessively against her lower back. I killed them all, he whispered against her temple. Every single one who dared to touch what's mine. A shiver ran down her spine. Fear or excitement, she couldn't tell anymore. The line between the two had blurred so much since she'd entered his world. His heart thundered against her cheek, and she could smell gunpowder mixed with his expensive cologne. You're trembling, he observed, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. His gaze was intense, possessive. Are you afraid of me, Bella? After everything? Lena swallowed hard. I'm afraid of how I feel when I'm with you. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. He gripped her chin, forcing her to maintain eye contact. And how do I make you feel? Like I'm losing myself, she whispered. Like I'm drowning in you. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Good. Because you belong to me now. Do you understand? No one else will ever touch you. No one else will ever have you. His words should have terrified her. They should have made her want to run. Instead, heat pooled in her belly, and her fingers curled into his blood-stained shirt. The monster who had kidnapped her, who had killed without mercy, was now the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. Rocco's thumb brushed across her bottom lip, leaving a smear of blood. Say it, Lena. Tell me you understand. I understand, she breathed, and she did. There was no going back now. The normal world she'd once known seemed like a distant dream. This was her reality now. Blood and luxury, violence and passion, all wrapped up in the dangerous man holding her. He crushed his mouth to hers, claiming her with a kiss that was both punishment and reward. Lena melted into him, accepting his dominance, his possession. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with promise. "You're mine," he declared, his voice rough with emotion. "And no one will take you from me." The words echoed through the empty warehouse, sealing her fate. Lena knew then that she was truly lost, not just to his control, but to the desperate, dangerous love that had grown between them. She was his now, completely and utterly, and the most terrifying part was how right it felt. The morning sun filtered through the bulletproof windows of Rocco's compound, casting long shadows across the blood-stained marble floor. Lena watched as his men methodically cleaned up the aftermath of yesterday's violence, erasing all evidence of what had transpired. Her wrists still bore the rope burns from her captivity, but those marks felt different now, like badges of survival rather than symbols of victimhood. Rocco stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his broad shoulders tense as he barked orders into his phone. Even now, hours after her rescue, his fury hadn't completely subsided. Every few minutes, his dark eyes would find her, as if making sure she hadn't disappeared. "Get it done," he growled into the phone before hanging up. In 3 long strides, he crossed the room to where Lena sat on the leather couch. His presence engulfed her, but instead of feeling trapped, she felt protected. "You need to eat something," he said, his voice softer than before. The tenderness in his tone made her heart skip. "I'm not hungry," Lena replied, but accepted the glass of water he pressed into her hands. His fingers lingered against hers longer than necessary. "You haven't eaten since yesterday," his jaw clenched, "before they took you." The memory of her kidnapping flashed through her mind, the betrayal, the fear, the certainty that she would die. But what stood out most was Rocco's reaction when he found her. The way he'd torn through her captors like a force of nature, his usual controlled violence replaced by raw, primal rage. "I saw what you did," she whispered, looking up at him. "For me." His dark eyes locked with hers, intense and unapologetic. "I'd do it again. Anyone who touches you dies." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they sent a shiver of something else down her spine. This was who he was. Violent, possessive, dangerous. And somehow, somewhere along the way, she'd stopped wanting to escape it. "Why?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Rocco's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her bottom lip. "Because you're mine. Because I can't breathe when you're not here. Because the thought of losing you makes me want to burn the whole world down." Lena leaned into his touch, finally admitting to herself what she'd been fighting for so long. She was just as possessed by him as he was by her. Their connection went beyond Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding. It was deeper, darker, more consuming than anything she'd ever known. "I used to dream about escaping," she confessed, watching his expression darken. "But now I can't imagine being anywhere else but here. With you." His grip on her tightened possessively. "You're never leaving. I won't let anyone take you from me again." She reached up, running her fingers along the scar on his jaw, a reminder of the fight to save her. "I don't want to leave. I'm yours, Rocco. As much as you're mine." A low growl rumbled in his chest as he pulled her closer. His lips crashed against hers, desperate and demanding. She matched his intensity, pouring all her fear, relief, and need into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, his forehead rested against hers. "Mine," he repeated, the word both a promise and a threat. His hands traced the rope burns on her wrists, and his expression hardened. "I'll kill anyone who tries to hurt you." "I know," she whispered, and she did. The man holding her was capable of terrible violence, but that same capacity for destruction made him an impenetrable shield around her. His darkness matched her own, their edges fitting together like broken pieces finally made whole. The cleaning crew quietly filed out, leaving them alone in the sunlit room. Rocco pulled her into his lap, his arms creating a cage of muscle and warmth around her. She felt his heartbeat against her back, strong and steady, a rhythm she'd come to associate with safety despite everything that had happened. "Rest," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you now." The morning light filtered through heavy curtains, casting shadows across Lena's bruised body as she stirred awake. The silk sheets whispered against her skin, a stark contrast to the violence that had unfolded hours before. Her fingers traced the tender spots on her wrists, where rope had cut into her flesh during her captivity. Blood still stained the marble floor near the entrance, evidence of Rocco's wrath that no one had dared clean yet. The metallic scent lingered in the air, a reminder of what he was capable of, what he had done to save her. Lena's hands trembled as she pushed herself up, wincing at the ache in her muscles. The bedroom door creaked open, and Rocco appeared, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. His knuckles were raw, dried blood still crusted in the creases. He'd killed for her, destroyed everyone who had dared to touch what was his. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his gaze remained sharp, predatory. "How many?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of them." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "Every last person who thought they could take you from me." Fear and desire twisted in her stomach. This was the reality of loving him: blood and violence, power and protection. The choice lay before her like a knife's edge. Embrace his darkness or walk away while she still could. Rocco stopped at the foot of the bed, his fingers gripping the ornate footboard. "I see the doubt in your eyes, Kara. The fear." His jaw clenched. "You need to decide. Now." Decide what? But she knew. God, she knew. "If you can accept this, accept me. All of me." He gestured to the bloodstains, to his wounded hands. "I won't change. This is who I am, what I am. The violence, the control, the power, it's in my blood." Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she looked at him, really looked at him. The dangerous man who had kidnapped her, controlled her, protected her. The monster who had shown her tenderness she never expected, who had laid his soul bare in rare moments of vulnerability. "I won't force you to stay," he continued, though his white-knuckled grip on the footboard betrayed his words. "But if you choose to leave, you leave forever. I won't chase you." His dark eyes burned into hers. "But if you stay, you're mine. Completely. No more resistance. No more fighting what's between us." The weight of his words pressed against her chest. This was it, the moment that would define her future. She could walk away, try to forget the taste of danger on his lips, the thrill of his possession, the safety of his protection. Or she could surrender to the darkness that had been calling to her since the moment he dragged her into his world. Lena rose from the bed on shaky legs, moving toward him like a moth to flame. His body tensed as she approached, ready for either acceptance or rejection. She stopped before him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, to smell the lingering scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne. Looking up into his face, the face of a killer, of a protector, of the man who had claimed every part of her, Lena made her choice. "I'm yours," she whispered, the words falling from her lips like a confession, like a prayer. The tension in Rocco's shoulders eased slightly, but his eyes remained intense, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he reached for her, his bloodied hands gentle as they cupped her face. The morning sun painted golden stripes across Lena's face as she stirred in Rocco's massive bed. Her declaration from the night before still echoed in her mind. "I'm yours." 3 syllables that had changed everything. The silk sheets rustled as Rocco's weight shifted beside her. "Get dressed," he commanded, his voice rough with sleep. "I want to show you something." Lena slipped into a black dress he'd bought her, noting how it hugged her curves without making her feel self-conscious. When she emerged from the bathroom, Rocco was waiting by the door in an impeccably tailored suit, his dark eyes drinking her in. They rode in silence, his sleek black Mercedes gliding through the city streets. Lena watched as the scenery changed from the wealthy residential area where his compound stood to the industrial district. Warehouses loomed on either side, and dock workers scurried about like ants. "This is where it starts," Rocco said, breaking the silence. His hand found her thigh, possessive and warm. "Every shipment, every deal, every penny that flows through this city passes through here first." Workers paused to bow their heads as the car passed. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable. Lena felt a strange thrill run through her, not at their fear, but at being on this side of it, protected, powerful. They drove through Little Italy, where restaurant owners rushed out to pay their respects, through Chinatown, where even the most hardened gang members stepped aside. At each stop, Rocco's grip on her tightened, as if marking his territory. "There are people who want to take this from me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "People who would use you to get to me." His fingers dug into her flesh. I won't let that happen. Lena watched a group of men scramble out of their way as Rocco's car approached. I understand now, she said softly. Why you need control. Why I need you. He cut her off, his dark eyes finding hers. You think you understand, but you don't. Not yet. The car turned onto a tree-lined street where massive houses stood like sentinels. Each one spoke of old money, of power accumulated over generations. Rocco's empire wasn't just about force, it was about legacy. Your enemies, Lena began, thinking of the betrayal that had nearly torn them apart. They're watching us right now, aren't they? Rocco's laugh was cold. They're always watching, but they won't touch you. His hand moved from her thigh to cup her face, forcing her to look at him. You're mine now. My weakness, yes, but also my strength. The car slowed to a stop in front of a sprawling mansion, its white marble facade gleaming in the morning sun. Italian cypress trees lined the circular driveway, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter with military precision. This is what you chose when you said those words last night, Rocco said, his thumb tracing her bottom lip. This world, my world, it's beautiful and brutal. Like us. Lena felt something dark and delicious unfurl in her chest. She had spent so long fighting him, but now she understood. The power he held over her wasn't just about fear or force. It was about belonging, about finally finding someone who saw all of her strength, her defiance, her darkness, and wanted her anyway. The car idled in front of the mansion, and Rocco turned to face her fully. His eyes, usually so cold, burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. This is our world now, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of an empire. Nothing, and no one can touch. Lena felt those words settle in her chest, heavy and permanent, like a crown she never knew she wanted to wear. The morning sun filtered through the bulletproof windows of Rocco's study, casting long shadows across his face as he read the message on his phone, his jaw clenched, muscles tightening beneath his expensive suit. Lena watched from across the room, sensing the change in his demeanor immediately. What's wrong? She asked, setting down the financial records she'd been reviewing. Rocco's dark eyes met hers, and the coldness there made her shiver. They're coming. All of them. The Castellanos, the Russos, even the fucking Calabrese family. His voice was deadly quiet. They think they can take everything from me. Before Lena could respond, the first explosion rocked the mansion's foundation. The windows rattled, and distant gunfire erupted from the grounds. Rocco moved with lightning speed, grabbing Lena and pulling her behind his massive desk. Stay down, he ordered, his voice harsh with urgency. He pulled out his phone, barking orders to his security team while drawing his gun. They're not just after me, they're after you too. Lena's heart hammered in her chest as another explosion shook the building. Why me? Because you're my weakness, he growled, checking his weapon. And they know it. The sound of fighting grew closer. Boots thundered down the hallway outside. Rocco's men engaged the intruders, and the air filled with gunfire and screams. Lena pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. Rocco stood, his massive frame blocking her from view as the study door burst open. Two men rushed in, guns raised. Without hesitation, Rocco fired, his movements precise and lethal. Both men fell, but more were coming. Move, he commanded, grabbing Lena's arm and pulling her toward a hidden panel in the wall. He punched in a code, revealing a narrow passage. Get in there and don't come out until I come for you. Rocco, she started, but he cut her off with a brutal kiss. No arguments, not now. He shoved her into the passage, his eyes wild with protective fury. I won't let them touch you. The panel slid shut, leaving Lena in darkness. She could hear everything through the thin walls, the gunfire, the shouts, the sounds of hand-to-hand combat. Rocco's voice rose above it all, commanding and fierce as he defended his territory. From her hiding place, Lena listened to the violence unfold. She heard Rocco's roar of rage when someone got too close to the panel hiding her. The wet sound of a knife finding its mark, followed by a gurgling cry, the thud of bodies hitting the floor. Where is she? A voice demanded, unfamiliar and filled with hate. You'll never touch her, Rocco snarled back. More gunshots. Something heavy crashed against the wall. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in the darkness. Lena's hands shook as she pressed them against the panel, feeling the vibrations of the fight. Outside. She could picture Rocco, moving like a force of nature through his enemies, deadly and unstoppable. Finally, silence fell. Heavy footsteps approached the panel. Lena held her breath, every muscle tense. "Lena," Rocco's voice rough with exertion. "It's over." The panel slid open, revealing him standing there, blood spattered and fierce. His shirt was torn, revealing fresh cuts and bruises, but his eyes were focused entirely on her. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. "They're dead," he growled into her hair. "All of them. Every last one who dared to think they could take you from me." Lena looked past him at the carnage in the study, evidence of his savage protection. Rocco's grip tightened as he sensed her tension. "This ends now," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You're mine, and I'll burn everything to the ground to keep you safe." The morning sun cast long shadows through Rocco's study as he paced the room, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. Lena sat in a leather armchair, watching him with careful eyes as he sorted through files scattered across his mahogany desk. Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap, the events of the previous night still fresh in her mind. "It doesn't make sense," Rocco muttered, more to himself than to her. The timing, the intel they had, it was too perfect. He slammed his palm against the desk, making Lena jump. She leaned forward, her accounting instincts kicking in. "Show me the patterns again," she said softly. Sometimes an outsider's perspective helps. Rocco's dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, the tension in his shoulders eased. He spread out several documents, pointing to specific transactions and dates. As Lena studied them, her blood ran cold. The betrayal was written in the numbers, clear as day. "These signatures," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're all authorized by Marco Rocco's childhood friend and right-hand man." The realization hit Rocco like a physical blow. His face hardened into a mask of rage and pain. "That fucking snake," he growled, his hands clenching into fists. "He's been playing both sides this entire time." Lena watched as Rocco's control began to slip. She'd seen his anger before, but this was different. This was personal. He grabbed his phone, barking orders to his security team to locate Marco immediately. Hours passed in tense silence as they waited. Lena could see the betrayal eating at Rocco. His usual confident stance was replaced by restless energy. Every so often, his eyes would find her, as if making sure she was still there, still safe. "I should have seen it," he said finally, his voice rough. "All these years, and I never questioned his loyalty." Lena stood, approaching him cautiously. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who can hurt us the most," she said, thinking of her own past betrayals. Before Rocco could respond, his phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message. "They found him," he said, "at the old warehouse by the docks." The drive to the warehouse was silent, heavy with anticipation. Rocco's men surrounded the building, their weapons drawn. Inside, Marco stood in the center of the empty space, a bitter smile on his face. "Finally figured it out, did you?" Marco's voice echoed off the concrete walls. "Took you long enough, brother." Rocco's response was cold, controlled. "Why? Why? Why?" Marco laughed, the sound hollow. "Because you've gone soft. This girl," he gestured to Lena, who stood behind Rocco's protective stance. "She's made you weak. The family deserves better." "The family?" Rocco's voice was dangerous, barely contained fury. "You betrayed the family. You put everyone at risk, including her." Marco reached for his weapon, but Rocco was faster. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, making Lena flinch. Marco's body crumpled to the ground, his eyes wide with surprise. Rocco stood over his former friend, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Lena, his eyes dark with an intensity that made her breath catch. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You belong to me," he growled, his voice rough with emotion. "No one else. Anyone who tries to take you from me will end up like him." The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Rocco's bedroom, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Lena sat at the edge of the bed, watching him pace like a caged animal. The aftermath of the betrayal hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken words and raw emotions. Rocco's shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched as he moved. Even in his silk dress shirt and tailored pants, he looked dangerous, a predator barely containing his rage. But Lena saw something else in his movements, something that made her heart squeeze. Fear. "You could have died," he said suddenly, his voice rough. He stopped pacing and turned to her, his dark eyes burning with intensity. "If they had?" He cut himself off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Lena stood slowly, her body still aching from the events of the past few days. "But I didn't," she said softly. "I'm right here. You don't understand." Rocco moved closer, his presence overwhelming her senses. "Everything I've built, everything I've fought for, none of it matters if—" He grabbed her arms, his grip firm but not painful. "I can't lose you." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him. Gone was the cold, calculating Mafia boss. In his place stood a man stripped bare, his walls crumbling. "I've spent years building this empire," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've killed, threatened, destroyed anyone who stood in my way. But you—" His hand moved to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. "You're my weakness, my addiction." Lena's heart thundered in her, the chest. She'd fought this for so long. The pull between them, the dark desire that consumed them both. But standing here, seeing the raw need in his eyes, she felt her resistance crumbling. "Every time I close my eyes," Rocco said, pressing his forehead to hers, "I see them taking you away. I see you broken, bleeding, and it drives me crazy." His grip tightened possessively. "I'll burn this whole city to the ground before I let anyone touch you." "Rocco." Lena's voice trembled. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its rapid beat beneath her palm. "Tell me you feel it too," he demanded, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me I'm not the only one who's lost their mind over this." The truth bubbled up inside her, impossible to contain any longer. "I feel it," she whispered. "God help me, I feel everything." His response was immediate and overwhelming. He crushed her against him, one hand tangling in her hair as he claimed her mouth in a desperate kiss. It was different from their previous encounters. No power play, no control, just raw need and surrender. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Rocco's eyes were dark with possession. "I'm addicted to you," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "And I'll never let anyone take you from me." Lena felt the last of her resistance crumble. In that moment, she understood that this was it. There was no going back, no escaping the darkness they shared. She belonged to him, body and soul, just as he belonged to her. Looking into his eyes, she saw their future, beautiful and terrible, passionate and dangerous, and she wanted all of it. The morning sun filtered through the bulletproof windows of Rocco's mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Lena stood at the window, watching the guards patrol the perimeter. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman transformed by love and violence, no longer the scared bookkeeper who'd been dragged into this world. Behind her, Rocco's heavy footsteps echoed through the room. His presence filled the space, commanding and powerful as always, but there was something different now, a softness reserved only for her. "What are you thinking about?" His voice was rough, like gravel wrapped in silk. Lena turned to face him, taking in his imposing figure. The expensive suit couldn't hide the predator beneath, the man who'd torn through his enemies to keep her safe. "About how everything's changed," she admitted. "About us." Rocco crossed the room in long strides, his hand coming up to cup her face. His touch was gentle, but his eyes burned with that familiar intensity that made her breath catch. "Do you regret it?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I should, after everything. The violence, the blood, the chaos. But I don't." His thumb traced her bottom lip, and she felt the slight tremor in his touch, the only sign that the untouchable Rocco Moretti wasn't as composed as he appeared. "You've changed me," he admitted, the words coming out like they physically pained him. "Made me weak." "No." Lena grabbed his wrist, holding him there. "I've made you stronger. Before, you only had your empire to lose. Now I have everything to lose." His other hand slid around her waist, pulling her closer. "You're my weakness, my obsession. Every breath you take is mine. Every smile, every tear, all mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat coursing through her veins. "And you're mine," she whispered back. The great Rocco Moretti, brought to his knees by a nobody bookkeeper. His grip tightened, almost painful. "You were never nobody. From the moment I saw you, fighting against my men, refusing to break, you were everything." Lena pressed her palm against his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath the expensive fabric. This was the real Rocco, not the cold Mafia boss, but the man who'd kill for her, die for her, burn the world down to, keep her safe. "Your enemies will try to use me against you," she said, voicing the fear that had been growing since their bond became unbreakable. Rocco's laugh was dark, promising violence. "Let them try. I've eliminated everyone who dared to touch what's mine. I'll do it again, as many times as necessary." He pulled her closer, until there was no space between them. His presence surrounded her, dangerous and comforting all at once. "You're not just mine anymore," he continued, his voice dropping to a growl. "You're my queen, my partner, my obsession. Nothing will ever change that." Lena looked up into his eyes, seeing the storm of emotions there, possession, desire, and something deeper, something that looked suspiciously like love, though neither of them had dared to name it yet. "Together," she whispered, "no matter what comes next." "Together," he agreed, his hand sliding into her hair. "Until death and beyond." His lips crashed down on hers, claiming her with a kiss that was both tender and fierce. In that moment, Lena knew there was no going back. She'd chosen this, chosen him, with all his darkness and violence, with all his possession and protection. And he'd chosen her, breaking every rule he'd ever made, risking everything he'd built to keep her by his side. "You're mine forever," he whispered against her lips. "No one else will ever have you." Her heart raced with the perfect mixture of love and fear as she replied, "And you're mine, no matter what."